Okay, well, we might get started. Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our Community of Practice session. My name is Sarah Walker, and I'm the Manager of Sector Development here at QCOSS. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the Yagara and Turrbal people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm facilitating this session today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And QCOSS acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the original inhabitants of Australia and recognises these unique cultures as part of the cultural heritage of all Australians. I would also like to respectfully acknowledge First Nations people joining us online today and would like to encourage you all to utilise the chat function to let us know which traditional lands you're dialing in from today. So for those of you who haven't attended a social isolation and loneliness community of practice session in the past, the aim of this community of practice is to provide an opportunity to share experiences, resources and learnings on social isolation and loneliness and best practice ideas for building community connection. So for today's session, we'll be focusing on volunteering as a response to social isolation and loneliness. And as many of you would be aware, the inquiry into volunteering was established in December 2024, and the committee actually tabled its report on Thursday last week. So this community of practice session is quite timely. And we're excited to be welcoming 4 guest speakers to our community of practice today. So we'll firstly hear from Steph Hogan, who is the Acting Deputy Director General, Water Infrastructure Policy and Partnerships at the Department of Local Government, Water and Volunteers. We're also excited to be joined by Jane Hedger, who is the CEO of Volunteering Queensland, Loren Ayres, who is the Senior Manager Operations Support at Orange Sky, and Nicole Leman, who is the Outreach and Volunteer Manager at Rosie's. So firstly, I'm going to hand over to Steph Hogan, and Steph's going to provide an overview of the key themes and recommendations from the Volunteering Inquiry report, including the opportunities it presents for the community services sector, particularly in relation to addressing social isolation and loneliness. And if you do have any questions for Steph, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll aim to address those questions at the end of Steph's presentation. So over to you, Steph. Thank you.
Great, thanks Sarah for that welcoming, and thanks for inviting me along to be part of today. I think it's a really good opportunity for us to show to people how the parliamentary inquiry to volunteering has really recognised that theme around social isolation and loneliness. And that's come through quite clearly in the report. So that was really pleasing that the committee has heard that message from people. Might take a step back and just maybe bring a few people up to speed about the inquiry that builds on what you just said, Sarah, as well. So it's something, the inquiry has been set up as a parliamentary committee. So that means, members of parliament have been considering over 570 submissions from different individuals and different organisations, many of which we've probably got representatives here and speakers here with me today as well. There's also been 15 hearings across different parts of the state for people to, I guess, put on the table what they're worried about in terms of volunteering participation rates and barriers and challenges, as well as the opportunities within the sector. All of that information came into those members of parliament as that committee to sort of consider and put forward a range of recommendations. And that report, it's like 120 pages long, and there's a lot of information within that, but it sort of centres on 8 key sort of themes of recommendations. But if you look closely, there's probably about, I think we're up to about 37 sub-recommendations that are kind of littered through all of those bits of the report. Fair to say, though, there's still quite a lot of work to unpack all of the sort of findings of that report and turn it into what will be the government's response to that. So there's still quite a bit of work to do, but a short period of time over the next 3 months in which to do that. We'll work that through with a couple of agencies. So there's a lot of state agencies that have either connections to or reliance on the volunteer sector in terms of providing value to community services. So we're working quite closely with a bunch of agencies around that. But just as importantly, we're working with some stakeholder representatives. And again, we've got some very key stakeholder groups in amongst that for us to help make sure that the department, I guess, stays on track with what we're tasked with doing, and that we're road testing some of those ideas before we come back with the government response. So people like Jane will be pretty instrumental in our partnership in turning that 120 pages of reporting to something that looks more like a response and an action plan, and something meaningful that we can sort of work towards together in a partnership. But back to today's theme in particular, I just wanted to sort of recognise that in the report and what the committee has heard is very clear, I think, in about 80 of the submissions, that social isolation and loneliness is very relevant to the volunteering sector, and offers immense value both to benefits for people that are volunteering, and the sense of civic contribution, being embedded within the community and offering value in that way, and what that can do in terms of health and well-being at the individual level, let alone the person or the organisation or the community service that's benefiting from that person's contribution, or the contribution of the organisation at its heart. So I think that's really good recognition, and that theme of recognition is something that's really strong through the report as well, that volunteers really want to be recognised and valued for the contribution, and the very, not just sort of meaningful contribution, but it has, like, you can put an economic value and against the benefit that every single volunteer offers by being part of the volunteer sector. So there's some really, it's probably a good collation of the various bits of information and commentary that has come through the submissions and the hearings. There's much more information online from different organisations, so you can access all the submissions. You can see transcripts of the hearing to sort of hone in on what people did say, if you want to see the longer version of all of that. Otherwise, the inquiry report is quite useful. But what I might do is just sort of go through maybe those 8 themes in particular. I'll just pull up my notes so I don't miss any one of them. It's quite a lengthy report, so it is sort of heavy reading. But yeah, you're welcome to take a look and get comments or questions to me either now or out of session if that's of interest to you. So the 8 themes that have come out have been adopting a whole of government approach to recognising, investing in and supporting volunteers. So mentioned that a little bit in terms of volunteers really wanting to be recognised, but it's not just about that. It's making sure that they've got the means and ability to be part of that sector. How do we support volunteers, and how do we support their organisations that look after them? So that's recommendation theme number 1. Number 2, I guess, is a catch-all around reducing barriers to volunteering, and some of that can be around information or systems that sort of help people in engaging in the volunteer sector. There's a couple of very specific themes in the report. One is in relation to Rural Fire Service Queensland around cultural and organisational issues as it's described, so very unique to that sort of sector. And the next, the 4th one, along a similar vein for SES volunteers, so improving the volunteer experience for SES. So we'll be working quite closely with people involved in both the Rural Fire Service Queensland as well as the State Emergency Services, just to sort of see how we can sort of help lean in across those, as well as across the other 6 of the 8. Improving conditions for existing volunteer resource centres. So we've got some resource centres that are situated across the state. I guess fair to say that the inquiry found that some additional support is required for those volunteer resource centres, including suggesting some support in the form of funding for those centres. Further engagement with government organisations and stakeholders. So for those not too familiar with the inquiry or what the department is doing around that, we've established a volunteer advisory forum, which is a bit of a stakeholder collective of, I guess, a small group of key volunteer organisations that are helping us to shape up the government response. But I guess that sort of highlighted the need for something like this to exist in an ongoing basis and connect the sector and the government more closely together, but also for the government to maybe lift its sort of performance around its space in the volunteer sector as well. Theme number 7 is around reviewing volunteer onboarding requirements, so making sure everyone's got an awareness of all the things that they need in order to be a volunteer and undertake that in a safe environment. And the last one is really probably in recognition of maybe some, I might put it as gaps maybe within things that came forward through the inquiry, both in submissions and the hearing, which is about investigating approaches for First Nations and multicultural communities. So I guess we would have liked to have heard a little bit more from both of those sort of aspects of community, and probably felt there's a bit more work that we need to do in that space to really draw out those aspects and see if there's any sort of specific support that we can offer in terms of participation in volunteering. So in a nutshell, that's kind of those 8 themes that sit around it. But fair to say that across all of those, you know, some really strong narrative within the report that volunteering is an enormous sort of benefit to the state government, to the community services that are offered. But on today's theme, a very important benefit that it provides to volunteers around that issue of social isolation and loneliness, as well as the benefit that it offers in that regard to the people receiving those services. So Sarah, that's probably, I guess, a bit of a snapshot from me within the time. And then, you know, if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take those or dive in a bit deeper on some things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph. That was a really good overview. And I can see in the chat that Emma has popped in the links for the full report and the executive summary as well. So thank you, Emma, for doing that. And Steph, and if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put your hand up and Steph will be able to answer those. And Steph, like in the meantime, what are the next steps? So yeah, those immediate next steps now that the report is released.
Yeah, so the so between now and the 18th of December, that's when the government is due to table the government response in Parliament. So it's a very specific parliamentary process that we go through, and like all government processes, there will be steps of process in between. But the things that matter probably the most are how the department unpacks the report and all of these recommendations and what it all means, and then working together with those state government agencies that are right across all of these different themes of the inquiry recommendations, as well as those stakeholder representatives through that volunteer advisory forum, to really sort of think about, well, what does that recommendation really mean if we try and turn that into a very practical outcome? What would that look like? Who should be involved in that? What would that cost? What would it deliver? What would be the benefit? So I think they're all the things that we'll be trying to work with both our internal to government as well as our external to government key stakeholders to try and build a response that makes sense, is achievable, but actually does something quite useful. So we're really committed to that, and really keen to work with our partners that this is the opportunity that we all wanted out of this inquiry, and does sort of create that platform for significant change.
That's great. Thank you so much, Steph. And yeah, thank you for that really comprehensive overview. That was really great. And yeah, I'd like to encourage you all to have a look at the documents linked in the chat. It was really interesting as well, reading through and seeing the quotes from organisations that you consulted with. So yeah, I would encourage you to all have a look at those links. Thank you, Steph. Jane, I'm going to go over to you now. And as we heard from Steph, the topic of volunteer management and areas within that did come up throughout the report from the inquiry. And we know that Volunteering Queensland has been championing this for a much longer time, given that effective volunteer management is really essential for the success and sustainability of organisations that rely on volunteers. Are you able to share some practical strategies to help organisations improve their volunteer management practices and become a volunteer attracting organisation?
Oh, there's so many things tied up in that question there. I could be here for hours. Look, we were very excited to see the report drop on Thursday. For us, it's very long on pages and a lovely summary of everything that we've heard, but we felt that there wasn't a lot of evaluation analysis behind sort of the 8 recommendations, and that it fell a little short for us on actually delivering for volunteers. There's some in there for specific organisations and volunteer involving organisations, but we still think that there's some more work around benefit for volunteers, and obviously we'll be working with the department and the Voluntary Advisory Forum and all of those avenues to try and tease that out a bit more. But one of the things when we talk about the benefit for volunteers, volunteering has an incredible duplicity, dual effect, not duplicity, dual effect, in that not only does the person who's receiving the organisation, who's got the volunteer working for them, and the person who's maybe receiving services through that organisation benefit from the volunteering, but volunteers themselves benefit enormously. We know that people who volunteer live longer, they're healthier, they stay in their homes longer as older people, they're more connected to their community, they're more resilient, they're better able to cope during a crisis. And we know that volunteering has a very important role to play to help people transitioning back into their community, whether they're transitioning perhaps out of healthcare, out of mental health care, out of incarceration, out of any kind of institutionalisation. And out of unemployment. So there's amazing opportunities there for volunteering to help connect people back to community, to help them connect to a sense of purpose and a sense of self, and quite often then is a wonderful gateway ultimately back into or back to employment. So there's so many benefits to the volunteer themselves, as well as having a good time and feeling valued. But that only happens if we have organisations who are good volunteer managers. And so we talk about the National Standards for Volunteer Involving Organisations, which talks about the things that organisations need to have in place to attract volunteers and to be a good volunteer involving organisation. So it's things about having actually thought about and crafted job descriptions for the volunteers, advertising in places that you'll find them, giving them a good and easy onboarding process, keeping them informed, giving them training that they need, making them feel welcome in the workplace and being inclusive. Reward and recognition is really a critical piece, because every volunteer will have a different way of being motivated. Some people want to be recognised, some people don't. So it's an individual thing of working out how you can make that volunteer feel special and important and recognised and seen. And then people who are in those organisations who do all those things to make it a great volunteering experience, who recognise them in a way that they're comfortable with and allow them to do volunteering work that's meaningful and has purpose for them, that person will, not only will they come back again and stay volunteering, they might volunteer more days, they'll tell other people and they'll bring other volunteers into your organisation. So that the best tip I have for organisations about how to get more volunteers is really think about the way you treat and design and reward and recognise the volunteers you've got, because we know that volunteers, the number one way people find volunteering opportunities is through word of mouth, and that is generally through somebody else who volunteers in that organisation. And you want people to be recommending your organisation to volunteering, not saying, oh, look, I had a bad experience with them, because we know bad news travels faster than good. So there's that really simple first step is to have a look at those national standards and go, well, are we doing all of those things? Are we making ourselves an attractive organisation? And are we being a good volunteer manager? So I think that's the first point of call. Volunteering Queensland website has any number of exciting resources on it, lots of resources around the standards. We help step you through designing volunteer opportunities, writing job ads, interviewing volunteers, doing onboarding. So there's an awful lot of resources and templates out there to help you. But just first getting into that headspace of going, like we want to be a model employer, we want to be a model volunteer manager, is really the first place to start. And to make sure that your organisation truly thinks of volunteers as part of your team and your family and your culture and involve them in that, because that will massively improve volunteer engagement. One of the things, we're currently running a seniors project, pilot project for the State Department, and we've started on the Fraser Coast and we're moving now to Roma, and we're running some different models of trialling how we engage older people who might be living on their own and isolated into volunteering opportunities. And we're piloting different strategies in both of those areas to try and get some data back to be able to give the government a better idea of how to more effectively engage people in the older cohort who might be experiencing loneliness and isolation. And because we know they like to volunteer a little differently, and the men like to volunteer differently from the women largely, there are some very interesting differences coming out in the community. But we also know then they want to volunteer differently to, for example, young people who might be isolated because they're experiencing bullying at school or depression or mental health, ill health. And we know that they then want to volunteer in a different way. So there's no one size fits all. It is really about the needs of the individual volunteer and the needs of the organisation, and finding a place in the middle where they meet and both parties, have a great time. So we're very excited about the seniors project and what that's going to tell us around helping to engage more older people who might be experiencing loneliness, isolation, but also then looking to see where we can work with the department now to do something similar in that younger cohort, to look at what the differences are, to be able to help volunteer involving organisations to make that distinction when they're advertising for volunteers and when they're designing volunteer opportunities. Diana, I see your comment there. This part's very interesting for seniors. I will get the link to the seniors site and I'll put it in the chat so that you can have a look at that project and see a little bit more information about that, because there's some fantastic work now being done in that space, and it's a beautiful project and it's got some great resources, so really commend that to you. Now, Sarah, I probably didn't cover all parts of your question there, but was there anything else, anything that I missed?
I think you did a really good job, Jane, of covering that. it was really, just around those practical strategies to help organisations improve volunteer management practices, which you touched on the starting point of that around position descriptions. But was there anything else you wanted to add?
Just thinking about that, I will also put in the link. So Volunteering Queensland has an RTO, the Australian College of Volunteering, and we're the only RTO in Australia offering the certificate in volunteer management and volunteer coordination. That's an amazing certificate, if I do say so myself, that really sets a great foundation for volunteer managers and coordinators to understand the basics of all of this. We have a great peer support network. We do regular webinars about recruitment and retention and helping you write job ads, helping you write volunteer position descriptions, helping you come up with interesting ways to recognise your volunteers. And so I heartily recommend that. It's very interesting. The Australian government only put volunteer manager on the ABS occupations list at the end of last year after an awful lot of advocacy from Volunteering Australia and Volunteering Queensland. So it's fabulous that not only are we now recognising that that is an occupation, but also in the next census we'll be able to starting to get some picture of exactly how many volunteer manager and coordinators there are across Australia, which will be really fabulous, again, to help with growing that professional development network for volunteer managers. So I think there's a lot of information out there. People often don't know where to go. Our website's a really good start. There's always webinars every month about different aspects of volunteer management, and we really encourage you to join any of those, and of course to ring any of our staff to talk about issues that you might have. But there's oh, Melinda, thank you. Great to know that you did that. We've been talking about having a cohort of all the alumni from previous years to do some work with all of you. So so you might get a call sometime soon. But yeah, so I'll put the links up to the seniors project and the link to the Cert 4 in volunteer management for you, just because I think they're really interesting to have a look at. But any questions, please feel free to call the team here at Volunteering Queensland anytime.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was a really great overview, and we'll definitely include all of those links that you've just spoken about in the post-event email, which will go out to all attendees. And it's, really fantastic. Volunteering Queensland has really wonderful resources, so look forward to sharing those with the group. Thanks, Jane. Loren, I'm going to go over to you now. At Orange Sky, the heart of your work really goes beyond providing those practical services to people, like the laundry and shower services. You've mentioned to me that really the heart of Orange Sky is about fostering connection through conversation with people. Are you able to talk a bit about how partnerships with other community service organisations enhance this approach, not only for the people that use your service, but also for volunteers themselves? And if you can talk a little bit about how these collaborations can create a network of support that benefits everyone involved.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And then it's right. I think what started off 10 or nearly 11 years ago now is just providing a very practical need of washing, or just washing at the time. And then Nick and Lucas, when they're doing their first wash, picked up what do we do while the washers are running? Oh, we have a chat. And that's actually more important in many situations than the washing itself. And so the way that Orange Sky functions is we typically always, not all the time, but the majority of our shifts will run alongside other service providers. Just like Rosie's, I was on a shift at Musgrove Park last week alongside the Rosie's volunteers, and that is providing more of a wraparound service for people who use the Orange Sky service, and we refer to those people as friends, so I'll use that terminology as I'm chatting today. But one of the most powerful ways that we've really built or sustained communities within that Orange Sky context has been through those collaborative partnerships that we form with other organisations. And it really is a model that's also built around reliability. So we have the same volunteer team, they show up at the same time, at the same place every week. So friends know where we're going to be, who we're going to be with, and what we're going to be providing. And they often know who they're going to connect and chat with when they arrive. And if you're experiencing homelessness or hardship, it can be very mentally exhausting to know, where am I going to go for my meal? Where am I going to go today for housing or a resource that I need? So having that reliability is a really important part of providing that service where people can come and genuinely relax and connect. But having that consistency and predictability in your week isn't just important for friends who use the service, it's also really important to create that routine for volunteers, and not just Orange Sky volunteers, but also Rosie's or Salvos or whatever organisation that we're connecting and working alongside with. So we've had volunteers who would have, we think of our volunteers as volunteers who've been with Orange Sky on the same shift with the same team, and that creates a community and a connection and a care ecosystem within itself for many years. But if we look outside of that bubble a little bit and how our shifts run, actually we would have volunteers who have worked maybe with Rosie's volunteers for years and years, and they've built those relationships and those connections, and they're formed to be similar to not just their Orange Sky volunteer team, but their Orange Sky, Rosie's, Salvos, Streak Medics shift team that they work and connect alongside with. And that's also a really important part of that community for our friends who come along. So there'll be friends who may not use the laundry service that day, that week. Maybe they haven't for many months or many years, but they still return every week at the same time to connect and chat with other friends on shift, volunteers. And again, it is about that community that those partnerships have cultivated and created as one. I think it really strengthens our service. So it's not just, hey, you offer coffee and food, we offer laundry, and we do it alongside each other. It's a relationship and a partnership that we've created where people come, and it's a ecosystem of care and a wraparound service that they can be provided. And that builds a connection where our volunteers really do support one another, so they can learn from each other, they can upskill from one another, they can support and debrief with one another, but they're also strengthening the services and how we're supporting friends or people using our services. So most of Nicole's team, Rosie's volunteers, they'd be really, really familiar with what Orange Sky services offer and how to help connect someone to the Orange Sky service and vice versa. And so they not only become experts of their own organisation, they start to become experts of each other's organisations as well, and can better connect people into where they need to seek support and how to do that in a far more relaxed and authentic way. So that uplifts us all if we're working as one and not working individually. And it gives that next sense of purpose as well, that you feel, I think for our volunteers, an even deeper sense of purpose and knowledge and skills and capability that they're developing over the years, because they really do become experts of their community and what's happening in the sector. And maybe going a little bit deeper, we recently ran our annual Volunteer Voice survey. And as we do every year, I'm sure all volunteer engaging organisations do the same. We ask what they love about their role and what motivates them to volunteer. And I think those questions, you'll find them for most organisations on the application form or a survey or a check-in. At some point we ask, why do you volunteer? And typically we always get the exact same answer: to make a difference in my community. That's beautiful and amazing, but I'm sure maybe Nicole or Jane, you might be familiar with that. That's a pretty common response that we have. And it's beautiful, but sometimes I wonder, is that the whole reason? Like, is there more depth within that? And what was really, really clear in asking our questions a little differently and adding a few more questions or options in there is that actually what's most important to them is the camaraderie and the friendships that they build. And that's not just, they were very clear, it's not just with volunteers at Orange Sky, it's with volunteers at Orange Sky, it's with friends, and it's with the service partners that they work alongside. And that's really important to them. That becomes their community as well. And then the next question we changed was that motivator. Why do you volunteer? And of course, they all said making a difference, but they had multiple choice. And so nearly equally, what we heard from volunteers was, yes, it was making a difference, but it was to feel a sense of belonging and to feel a sense of purpose. And that is really, I think, a clear indicator for us of how important volunteering is for that sense of belonging, in having a community, having a purpose, having that routine, and you know that there'll be a team of people who you can connect with, and maybe you're feeling a bit socially isolated or a bit lonely or a bit disconnected, but you have that reliability that there'll be a team of people that you'll be connecting with, and you're a part of that community and you're an important part of that community. And we could do that in some elements, just as Orange Sky, it functions on its own, but actually what is really powerful and has a much more emphasised and impactful experience for our volunteers is that collaboration with different services, because it's not just around us providing a better service and a better experience for the friends or people who are using the service and their connection and building a community where they have a sense of community and connection, but it is really that partnership across volunteers that we're seeing that they love, they enjoy. That's why you have one when you can have multiple teams that you get to work alongside. And I think that provides a far more supportive but overall fulfilling experience for our volunteers.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Lauren, that's really interesting to hear those results from the survey, and that the partnerships element came through so strongly in that. I think it really speaks to the benefits of connection, both for volunteers themselves, but then also, of course, the person accessing the service then has that wraparound support as well. So really that mutual benefit. Thank you so much for that. Nicole, I'll go over to you now, and Jane touched on this and also Lauren touched on this, but of course there is that benefit of volunteering for the volunteer themselves in reducing social isolation and loneliness, but also of course for the person accessing the service. Are you able to talk a bit about how the Rosies model is designed to foster a sense of community and connection for volunteers themselves as well as the patrons you support?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. Probably before I address the question directly, it's important to talk about what Rosie's mission is and the fact that Rosie's mission centres exclusively around connection. There are so many services in our sector which do brilliant work, and many of them start out or primarily seek to meet a physical need. Rosie's doesn't seek to meet a physical need. We seek to meet people's psychosocial need for connection, and that is what our mission centers around. The way that our model works, we operate, we have 14 branches across Queensland, and we operate in a hub and spoke way that each of those branches support their local community. So you can kind of think of it as our volunteers that volunteer within their respective branch. Each night of the week, obviously not the same people every night, but our volunteers venture out in a Rosie's van in their respective location where they live within their community to support other people through the power of connection. So it's really this locals supporting locals model. What we do on the street, we drive our van out and we offer a tea and coffee, just like you would to a friend who comes to your home and is in need of, you know, just a friend. They need someone to talk to. We create that space on the street. We utilize a simple tea and coffee to sit down, give someone something to do with their hands, and we chat. And it really, from, you know, that's such a powerful and hopeful thing, both for our volunteers and for our patrons, that unconditional acceptance. And I know that Steph talked about barriers to volunteering and also barriers accessing services. That level of unconditional acceptance at Rosie's really enables people to connect on a really pure level. We don't ask anything of our volunteers, of our patrons. And then friendships inevitably grow from that over time. From the patron perspective, like I said, like everyone is welcome at Rosie's. If people don't want to tell us their name, they don't have to tell us. That you can remain entirely anonymous. You don't have to give us your Medicare number, and you don't have to have a driver's license and a birth certificate. You just show up and sit down. And we really let patrons guide us in what they need in each moment. And we, you know, embrace the nature of that work. For many of our patrons, realistically, they come to our service to seeking to meet a physical need. They'll hear in the community through the grapevine, oh, Rosie's, you can get a cup of noodles there and a coffee, you can go there for dinner, right? And so they'll come to us and that they'll think that that's the service that they're going to get. They're hungry, they need supplies, but that's not what keeps them coming back. Like, I would bet no one would come back for pot noodle every day of the week. Pot noodle's not that good. It's the connection and the fact that they can have a place where they can sit, let their guard down for a few hours after being hyper vigilant of their own safety, everything that happens on the street. And it's that there's someone there who they can rely on to care about them as a human being. That's what keeps people coming back. And, you know, many of our, as a reality for many of our patrons, they feel discarded by society, like no one cares, let alone even knows that they exist. And the experience of coming to the Rosie's van and having a Rosie's volunteer say, oh, hey, Shane, it's so good to see you. I missed you last week on outreach and I was wondering what was going on with you. Let me grab you a coffee. It's white with 2 sugars, right? And having someone recognize that is from such a simple, it's such a simple thing. But for someone who hasn't had someone look them in the eye for a week, no one said their name since they last came to the Rosie's van, it's profoundly hopeful for them. And it gives them, you know, a sense of, yeah, like, oh, this person does care about me. And that is based in the connection. On the flip side of that, so from the volunteer perspective, it absolutely what Lauren was saying, like we operate a similar model in terms of the way that our shifts are structured, that kind of thing. We go out with teams that regularly go out together. And it's interesting in that we have the same thing where people come to us. And I think a lot of people do go into volunteering with this saviorist approach, to be realistic about, you know, oh, I'm at a place where I feel I've got something to give to community, and they inadvertently find themselves relishing in this social connection aspect of the work, and they still value what they're giving to the community. But if you were to ask them slightly further down the line, what do you like most about Rosie's? Like, why would you not want to leave? It's, I just love my teammates, you know, I'm really invested in them. Because of the fact that our volunteers are assigned to teams and they go out with their same group of people every single month to the same location, same time, they become really close over time. Like, I certainly don't see all of my friends, personal friends, once a month and spend 4 hours with them every single month of the year. And so you really start to care deeply about other people and this sense of kind of like being in the fold of the team and then the organization as a whole. And I think the beauty of that model is not that it, you know, benefits volunteers from the sense of connection and it benefits patrons, but that the fact that the volunteers have that sense of community and connection, that's what they take onto the street. That is, they're cultivating that internally and seeking to share it externally, which is really beautiful. And it's and it's funny because it's for both volunteers and patrons alike. Maybe it's not what either of them came for, but it's the part that they cherish in the work and the beauty of the model, in that I don't think in terms of, you know, you don't directly engage people by saying, hi, I'm here to connect with you. But through offering that much more, I guess, subtle touch around engagement and having a model designed in this way, people almost like inadvertently fall into being supported in that way, which is really lovely. So yeah, I think our model is being centered around connection as our mission, gives us a really strong North Star in that people come to us for this as well. But it doesn't stop there. It's at every layer of the way that we operate centers around that. So yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. That was really powerful how you mentioned the volunteers who go out with that same group every month, for example, because they connect so strongly, then they take that connection out on the street. And it really makes sense that that works like that. Oh, Jane, you've got a question.
Just more an observation. A lot of the work that we're seeing out of the Seniors Project in particular is just from those volunteers saying, we kind of just want to be seen. Because as older people or people with disability, they often disappear in the community. And they've gone from having a purpose, often raising a family, perhaps working, running a household, being a good partner. And those of them then, you know, left on their own with children who live and grandchildren who live far away, that somebody actually seeing them and saying hi and having that interaction with them, but then also having that purpose and that helping, that's what was there, just going, I'm just so excited. I'm loving to make a cup of tea for someone else because I feel like I've got something to do. And that small piece of purpose and helping someone else, but as well then in that, the reciprocity of that, in just being seen by someone and someone actually having a conversation with them, as opposed to, you know, sometimes your healthcare provider might whiz in and whiz out. Your doctor sort of barely looks at the patient, makes some notes, hands you this, whatever. I think that's that opportunity just to sit with someone and be seen is incredibly powerful, and that's certainly a lot of the feedback that we're getting. And amazing, Rosie, is that you just have a whole business that's about creating those incredibly powerful and impactful connections that make people feel seen.
Yeah, and I mean, as my personal experience, so I now work for Rosie's in my role, but I started with Rosie's 5 years ago as a volunteer, and I won't deny I came out onto the street being like, yep, I've got something to give. I'm in a position of, you know, privilege. Look at me, I can give this. And my very first shift out on street, I was so humbled by the sense of community that our patrons have. And I took a step back during that and after that outreach and really reflected for myself, going, I came to this thinking that I had something to give, but I actually have a lot to learn. And there's a lot of, these people are more connected to each other than I am with. And I think it was a really powerful, I guess, like mental transition for me. And I imagine it's the same for many of our volunteers, in that, yeah, like we have assumptions and biases that we assume, and then we go out on street and we're so leveled by the community aspect of it, which is really powerful. Martina?
Hi, everyone. I am a volunteer. I do actually, choose volunteering exactly because for the reasons we are here today. And I wanted first and foremost to reinforce what we are saying right now, meaning that clearly depends on the organization, not always, but in many places we can definitely deliver or offer a service, and at the same time creating a connection with the people we are working with. And it is so much more a more beautiful experience, because we actually create community in that moment. And connected to that, I have two questions, one for Stephanie and the other for Jane. For Stephanie, I wanted to know if at the advisory forum, if there are actual volunteers represented. And the other question to Jane is if the middle age bracket is considered for special programs as well, because, well, that's my age group was one thing, but I'm thinking also particularly maybe on one side for women who maybe have were homemakers their whole life and have then grown-up children, and that could be helpful, or someone who has lost a job or is transitioning from one job and another. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Martina. Steph, did you want to kick that off?
Yeah, sure. I can
Thanks.
go first, and thanks for the question. And it's great that you've sort of come along and that this forum's sort of spoken a good theme and relevant theme to you. So in relation to the question, and what I'll probably also get maybe Charlotte, who's with me from my team here, is to just maybe post sort of the member organisations that are part of our volunteer advisory forum, just so you know sort of who's involved in that. But yeah, we do have a combination of organisation representatives, so as well as individual, we do have volunteers that are in amongst there as well. So we even have the a lady called Rianka Lincoln, who is the Queensland Young Volunteer Award recipient for this year. So very much sort of a fresh and very enthusiastic face, and I think that that's given us some good some good insights into the younger side of our community and sort of what speaks to them around volunteering. We also have Rural Fire on there as well. We've got people that probably are paid representatives within their organisation, but I would say equally passionate about volunteers, and are also a combination of volunteer managers as well as volunteers themselves. So I think Charlotte has just posted in there who those organisations are. So we've got Q-Sport, Volunteering Queensland, Red Cross, the Queenslanders with Disability Network, LGAQ, because I guess particularly during disaster time, we've got lots of councils getting involved, Rural Fire Brigade, Association of Queensland, Queensland Resources Council. The resources sector does quite a lot in corporate volunteering in particular, and Young Volunteer of the Year recipient. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sort of cross-section perspective of the organisations that we're sort of speaking to more directly now. Thanks, Sarah.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Steph. And Jane, I think the second question was for you. Did you want to answer that one?
I just had a discussion with the federal department before I got onto this call, and we're talking about the Volunteer Management Activity Program, which is funded under the federal government, and they have priority cohorts, and one of those priority cohorts is vulnerable women, and we've identified those as being women who might be coming out of incarceration, women who might be coming out of domestic violence, but we've also identified women who might be making that transition from homemaker to employment, or from homemaker to finding some other source of meaning. And we're in the process of developing what the next round of that volunteer management activity program is. It's usually funded in 5 years, and the next one comes up at the end of this financial year. So we're talking with them already about the sorts of things we want to see, and this is one of the programs we particularly want to grow, is this program around and volunteering opportunities around vulnerable women. So I'm hoping in about 12 months that we'll see some federal targeted programs around that. There is already quite a lot of work being done with various groups around Queensland, but this will be very exciting, hopefully, because of course the rubber always hits the road when we're looking to, for the funding, that will come out sort of July 26, and we'll be able to announce some projects around that.
That's exciting.
Just,
Thanks so much, Jane.
A little bit, sorry, just a tiny addition. I thought, looking into the future, I may be considering men as well, because I think we will see a lot of work transitions and work losses, or work losses and then transitions. So yeah, I think that could be a good focus as well. But thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Martina. Lorraine, I'm going to go over to you now. I've just got a question for you around diversity in volunteers. And, there's potentially a lot of untapped groups out there that organisations could engage with as volunteers. Are you able to talk a bit about how Orange Sky has developed varied volunteer roles and service models to reach and involve different volunteer demographics?
Thanks, Sarah. I think that was perfect timing, Martina, around that conversation of how we tapping into different groups, and that might often be unseen, or there might not always be the best role suited for them. And at Orange Sky, we've had pretty traditional volunteer structure and a very simplified structure where it had been you're either a general volunteer working directly on the van, or you're a member of the volunteer leadership team. And those roles are incredible. They're really impactful, and they are what power our services and what's allowed us to grow and expand to meet the needs of more people. But it's not always suitable for everybody. And we really wanted to explore who are those people that aren't coming to an Orange Sky shift, and whether that be to use the Orange Sky service or to volunteer on an Orange Sky shift. And we know we've just talked about women and the impact for women. Currently in society, we know that they're one of the fastest growing groups of people experiencing homelessness and hardship. But they're not coming to Orange Sky shifts, or they weren't highly represented, which doesn't quite align with the data that we have. And so we started to look at who else is not represented on our shifts, and why, and where are they, and how do we breach that barrier and build that connection with them. And so at Orange Sky, we're a bit odd and quirky, and we use weird terms. And so we, part of our innovation team, had launched a project called Where's Wally and Wilma, which is where are the people that aren't coming to shift? And one element of that was women. And so we launched and trialled some women's only shifts that are run by women for women. And they provide, for many people, a safer, more private, more confidential, comfortable space for women to be able to access our service, but also have that really important component of connection and tackling some of that loneliness that they might be experiencing, and that being heightened because they're not feeling that they can go to some of the usual support services that others might. And so where they might not feel safe or comfortable in more of a mixed gender style space, but equally there's many of our female volunteers or women volunteers who might feel the same. And so that's a beautiful marriage of women-only spaces for volunteers and for friends coming along. And another example that we have of that is families. So at the moment, there are a lot of displaced families in temporary crisis accommodation, a lot. And if you're a parent with a few kids in a motel room and you've got to do school and work and bedtime and bath time, it just might not be practical for you to cart your 5 loads of washing down to the local shift. And so how do we support those families and have that connection? And what that looks like for us is our pick-up drop-off shifts that we run. So volunteers pick up laundry bags from the family's front door, take them to the laundromat, wash them, bring them back cleaned. But that also created a new model for us for volunteers. There's a lot of volunteers who might not fit our traditional shifts. Perhaps it's physical barriers or their abilities, mental health, psychosocial challenges, a bit of social anxiety or neurodiversity, and they don't fit a normal busy shift environment as well, but they still want connection and they still feel a bit isolated. And so this creates a perfect model for them where instead of connecting and engaging face-to-face with friends, they've got their team of volunteers. They can come, they might love the logistics, so they go to the laundromat, they do the washing, they do the practical stuff. And then those volunteers who love the connection and the chat and the conversation will stay at the motel and connect with families, play games, chit chat, have a nice time. But that's a nice model for both of those parties where you can't get to a normal shift or you might not be well suited for a normal shift that we run. And so getting creative and thinking outside the box to find how do we still provide that support in a way that meets different volunteer style needs. And I think that's really powerful. And looking at, and as you were talking, Jane, there was something else that came to my mind around regional barriers or geographic barriers. And at Orange Sky, we've got, I think, about 27 of our services across Australia now are in regional communities. But that's amazing because it creates that opportunity for volunteering, which can often be quite a barrier if you're disconnected from a metropolitan area, and particularly for young people and having skill-based roles that they can develop for that work pathway, as we talked about, and building different types of connections and learning to connect and engage with different demographics of people. And so those leadership positions that we run really do create a very valuable connection or volunteer style role for people who might not typically have as much opportunity to do that in an in-person capacity. So it's been great, and we still have a long way to go in our learning and our innovation and exploring of what other models that are out there that better meet our friends' needs, but then also in turn better meet those volunteers and more people who may typically be a little disconnected from what our traditional volunteer role would be. That's bridging that barrier for them and providing an opportunity. I think it's really in line with what a lot of us have talked about today, is starting to get a little more creative as to how we approach volunteers and volunteering.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Yeah, those are really great examples of how you understood your volunteer cohort or the group that's interested in volunteering and adapted your service model to suit different types of volunteers. So thank you for sharing that. I'm aware that we've just gone over time, but Nicole, I just wanted to see if you'd be happy to answer one more question, because I think people on the line would really find it useful to hear about Rosie's volunteer engagement strategy, and if you could touch on how you engage volunteers across the entire life cycle, so from attraction and onboarding to ongoing support.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Thank you.
So I think before I dive directly into the strategy and the timeline itself, a really important concept for I think to touch on here is acknowledging the differences that must be embraced with a volunteer workforce compared to a workforce that is paid. It's a beautiful thing that people do volunteering, but without that element of a paycheck, managing and engaging people is very, very different. And you can't make volunteers do what you want. You can't make them do what you as an organization needs. So it's really important before you even start thinking about the steps on a volunteer journey that you're in tune with what motivates people, to volunteer, what motivates them coming to your organization, and then being able to utilize that in a really gentle way to bring them on the journey so that they are engaged at each step and you're not having to kind of like beat them with the stick, rather than we're using that carrot of their motivator to bring them on that journey. So I wanted to touch on that first. In terms of the journey itself and our strategy, there's a few kind of key steps that you can put into pillars here, where we can talk about recruitment, onboarding and training, that ongoing engagement while they're actively involved in the volunteer workforce with us, and then exit and like post volunteering. So, and each of these opportunities really offers each of these pillars really offers an opportunity to strengthen a volunteer's relationship with your organization, and that includes the exit pathway as well. So I'll start right at the start. Realistically, for Rosie's, recruitment begins long before a volunteer fills out their paperwork with us, long before we put up a job ad or even think about a role description. We recognize the importance of Rosie's brand, our reputation in the community, and the value of these touch points with potential volunteers, sometimes years before they walk through our doors. Are a really good example of this. And I guess there are many, if we talk about the funnel of volunteers, there are many avenues which people come to Rosie's within that funnel. But one of the ones that I'd like to touch on, which I think is really powerful for Rosie's and sets us apart a little bit from some of the other organizations in the same space, Rosie's runs a youth engagement program where we essentially partner with schools around the state. We've got 90 schools on board with us this year. And through that partnership, we have small groups of young people in year 11 and 12 come out alongside Rosie's volunteers, work on our shifts. They wear our uniform. If they weren't, 10 or 50 years younger than the rest of the volunteers, you wouldn't know that they're on a different program. And having that touch point, these young people are too young to volunteer with Rosie's as a regular volunteer when they first come to us. But it's incredible the number of those volunteers who, after they graduate, whether that be in November when they graduate or 10 years later, they come back to us and we ask them, how did you hear about us? And they say, I volunteered during school. That pathway is really rich, and you can't underestimate how these seeds that you plant for people long before they walk through the door is the true value of the recruitment pathway. That same thing goes for, and like similarly in terms of the long lead, is with our corporate and community partners. We do a lot of events, just being around, showing up places, putting in time, not like we don't charge people for our time when we go to their workplace and do a mock outreach for them so that they can understand what Rosie's is like. But it plants the seed for people, and that pays dividends on so many levels, not just from volunteer recruitment, but obviously from the perspective of donors and in-kind and all these kinds of things. Recognition, you never know where those seeds are going to go. And so we invest heavily in that long line funnel. And as a result, we almost have like the best problem when it comes to recruitment, in that we don't have enough spaces for people that want to join us. Our volunteering recruitment all happens through our website. We open up EOIs through our website, and within like hours to a day of opening those up, the spots are filled and we have to close it again. And people will be calling us at head office going, oh, I was just getting my details together and now it's gone. And, it's it's amazing, really, you know, when and really a privilege for me as our volunteer manager to not have to be reactively engaging volunteers. We're proactively engaging volunteers, and it means that when we do need people, they are chomping at the bit to come on board with us. We're not having to like Shanghai your mum's grandma to like come and fill a shift, or you know, that kind of thing. It's really beautiful. So I guess the next step from there is that onboarding process. This is really where we start to get real with the volunteers. You know, they will know about Rosie's, what we do, and our mission, and that's all lovely and feel good. But this is the process, the time in this process where Rosie's demonstrates our clout as a professional organization, and that, you know, it's important that the communications are timely, that the processes are clear, that if there's any issues along the way, whether that be like tech issues or I need help getting my blue card, that volunteers are supported in that process, and that they feel as though, you know, the support that we're providing them is setting them up for success as a volunteer with us, but also that we're setting ourselves up as an organization for success with them as well. Once paperwork is done, there's the training piece, and this is really where we start to hit the ground around that sense of community. We obviously talk about things in our training that are preparing people for what they're going to see and encounter on the street. We're talking risk, safety, governance, all that kind of stuff that's a reality of our work, but it's that communal buy-in that we're starting to get to Rosie's mission, even from that very first training session where people come, they meet like maybe 30 other volunteers that are brand new, and by the time they leave, they feel part of Rosie's. It's really important, that step. And from there, they then become part of our active volunteer pools. So like Lauren and I both talked about, our volunteers are assigned to a team, and then they become kind of part of that team's culture on an ongoing way. But from an organizational perspective, while they're in that kind of active phase of the volunteer journey, while our touch points with them are predominantly through their team and their team leader, we as an organization are providing them opportunities to still try and meet the needs of those motivators that we initially identified, and trying to give them opportunities that they might not have even thought. They came to Rosie's thinking, oh yeah, I could upskill in that, but we provide them with an opportunity. So, you know, whether it be ongoing training, we offer people to do mental health first aid, we offer them to do this, that, and the other, which is brilliant for how it translates on the street, but it's also relevant to a lot of people's work, and it's relevant to things outside of their volunteering. We offer them opportunities to grow into leadership roles, whether that be, you know, within their team, so becoming the team leader of their team, or becoming the branch coordinator who looks after and does more of the volunteer management at a local level. And we're always thinking about, how do we engage people in a way that is at the level that they want? They're not being overwhelmed with engagement from us. They're getting what they need, but they're not feeling left out. They're still feeling bought into Rosie's as an organization. And there's a real balance there. I think something that's really powerful for Rosie's is that we have incredible tenure with our volunteers, and it's not by accident that we have that. It's the very purposeful approach to mission and connection that keeps people with us on street. And sometimes, like, I'll be honest, some of the experiences that our volunteers have on the street with patrons can be very unsavory. And if you didn't feel connected to Rosie's as an organization, or to the people around you, or supported in that experience, you would never go back out. You would never, ever go back out. But having that embedded before the experience happened, we seldom lose people because of that kind of thing. I guess as an example, as I mentioned, I started with Rosie's as 5 years ago as a volunteer. I still volunteer with that Wednesday Roma Street team that I first started with. So there are myself and 9 other volunteers on that team. I've now been with Rosie's for 5 years in a volunteer capacity, and 4 of the others have more than 10 years with Rosie's. And we're not the exception, which is the best part about it. Like, don't get me wrong, volunteer turnover is something that is part of this work. You know, people, their lives change, or they come to training, or they do their first shift and they go, maybe this isn't for me. And that's cool. Like, we acknowledge that. That's part of the work. But it's that sense of community and connection that's so powerful, both with the patrons and the volunteers, that keeps people coming back. The very last point, I know I'm like talking, but is exit. Inevitably, people exit, you know, and I think it's very easy to sweep this stage under the rug and just turn your head straight back to your active volunteers and forget about those that are leaving. This is a really key opportunity that we utilize to improve and gather feedback to improve our volunteer journey. We utilize exit surveys, but also the relational factor with our volunteers, in that we want to know why they're leaving, how we can improve. And rather than just saying, thanks for the exit survey, love it, see you later, we really acknowledge that most of the volunteers that are leaving us don't do that because they never want to hear from us again. Their lives have just changed, or they've moved, or they've had a child, you know. And so we continue to engage them on a lighter level, on an ongoing basis. So we send quarterly newsletters. We invite people to be members of Rosie's. We're a member organisation, so that they can stay involved with us in a different capacity that works for them in their new stage of life. And it's that long tail again. So we've got the long funnel and the long tail that pays dividends. We've got volunteers who return. We have volunteers who become donors. They're rallying their workforce or their workplace or their community organisation that they're involved in to support us. And so it's an opportunity that's, I don't think, harnessed enough in our sector as part of the engagement journey. So yeah, that's a snapshot of how the Rosie's volunteer engagement strategy looks like. If anyone has questions about, feel free to send those to me. I know we're running over, but my inbox is always open as well.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was so useful. I really like how you walked us through all of those different steps and shared those practical strategies of what Rosie's does at each of those steps. So thank you so much. And I agree with you that the exit part is really, really important. I think probably an area that a lot of organisations would benefit from focusing more on as well, because it's often one of those areas that we kind of forget about. But yeah, really valuable. Thank you so much. I just want to say a big thank you to our amazing guest speakers today. So thank you to Steph, Jane, Nicole and Loren for joining us and so generously sharing with us. It's been a really great session, and thank you everyone for joining us today as well. I'll just pop through a few links in the chat. We do have an evaluation survey. We'd be really grateful if you could complete that one so you can find out how you found today's session. And I also just wanted to let you know that registrations are open for our next Community of Practice session, and that one focuses on social prescribing in practice. And at that session, we'll be hearing from 4 organisations who are delivering social prescribing programs in their community. So thanks everyone for attending. Thank you again to our wonderful guest speakers, and we look forward to seeing you at our next Community of Practice. Thanks everyone.